What's so fun is that today it's Meghan and Meghan talking about Meghan Markle. Today, we're not doing hot headlines. We're not doing any of that because the hottest thing that happened this week in pop culture was seriously this interview with Oprah, Meghan Markle, and Prince Harry. And we are just going to do this deep dive, kind of recap on what happened and give our thoughts. I'm sure a lot of people listening or watching saw the interview. When I
Yeah.
did my Framing Britney episode, I noticed that a lot of people already watched Framing Britney, but sometimes when you listen to somebody else talk about it, you like pick up on things that you didn't
Yes,
notice.
for sure.
Just starting from the top. So the interview, it starts out with Meghan and Oprah. Harry isn't there. It's just the two of them kind of chatting. And I thought that this was interesting because he's always been like an advocate for her. And you would think that him being there would almost like validate what she's saying, which we can come back to that, like how a lot of people are trying to invalidate her points and say that she's lying about a lot of things. But I would like love to know why Oprah thought just to sit down with Meghan at first, like maybe just to let her get the narrative out and
I
not be
think
filtered.
so. I think so. I think that she wanted it to be about her while they're married. And he, like you said, he's always been an advocate for her. I think that it was essential part of the interview to have her moment by herself because this was something that she went through. And while Harry was with her, I think it was important to highlight that, her personal experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I also think Harry and Oprah are like working closely together on a series that's going to come out later, which she talks about later on in the interview how they're like working together because something Meghan brings up kind of aligns with it. But I just thought it was interesting how they just cut him out. I mean, honestly, like the majority of the interview is with just Meghan. Harry's there
Yeah.
for like a minute. He's there for just a hot minute. Oprah like starts this interview off saying that she prefaces it with saying Meghan hasn't been told what the questions are going to be. She's not being paid for this.
Yeah.
Basically, like knowing that the haters were going to come out and say
It's not
she's
their
lying.
house.
Yeah, it's not their house. Like it's common grounds,
Yeah.
and she's kind of doing this. I think Oprah's like a really good journalist, right? We
Oh
know
my,
this.
the best.
Right. So she's kind of doing this because she knows people are going to come out and hate. And it's like, she's not gaining, Meghan isn't gaining anything. She's not gaining money from this. She's not gaining partnerships from this. And before any of this crazy shit came out with the Queen and the royals afterwards, totally taking them out of royalty, this was filmed. So
Yeah.
this didn't come out before that. Decisions were made prior to the interview happening. And they start with like a happy memory. I mean, Oprah's talking about Meghan's wedding day,
Wedding. Yeah.
which obviously Oprah was in attendance. So were a ton of other A-list celebrities from the
Yeah.
US. And Oprah says that she felt like it was a super magical day. And, she asks Meghan, like, do you feel like it was a magical day? As a viewer, we thought it was, but
Yeah.
did you feel that? And Meghan literally says, like, no. She says that she felt like she could tell and Harry could tell that the day wasn't for them, it was for the world.
Yeah. Which, let me even say, and I am obsessed with royals. I mean, all of them, not just the House of Windsor, like all the way back, like Tudors and come all the way up. I watch all things royal, like I'm obsessed. So they did not have to do that. Recently Harry's cousin got married, and they both had cousins, Beatrice and Eugenie, and they both of them had very small weddings. Yes, they were during COVID, but we didn't see, we got like one or two pictures, so they didn't really have to do that. Maybe they felt obligated to, but it wasn't necessary for them to have like all the pomp and circumstance that came along with this royal wedding. um so I feel like you could tell, don't you think so, in some of the pictures that she seemed a little like, this is holy shit, this is a lot that's happening. I felt like I was underwhelmed when she came out of the carriage and all of that with her wedding. Didn't you get that vibe?
Yeah, I did, but I also think like okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate, and I know I'm going to get so much hate for this. But the truth is, like, I agree with you. And I think a lot of people don't know that there are obligations. In a lot
Mhm.
of situations, there are definites, like you have to do this, you have to do this as a royal, or being vetted into the royal family. But like a large wedding isn't one of them. It's a show that you feel like is an obligation. And so I get what she's saying about like, we knew the day wasn't for us, it was for the world. But it's very hard for me to believe that she didn't want that a little bit. I
Yeah.
mean, okay, let's just think for 1 second. So Meghan, we know she's an actress. She's used to kind of being in front of the cameras. And I think like let's take personality aside, let's take like who she is morally aside. If you're somebody in entertainment, and I can speak to this and so can you from interviewing people in
Yeah.
entertainment, they get high off that. They get high off people watching them. And what bigger platform to, as an actress or as a performer, as a creative, to have attention on you than literally a royal wedding, right? So
Yeah.
maybe she
And
felt
even
obligated, but I mean, there had to have been like a sliver of her as an actress or just as a girl living
I
out
was gonna
your
say,
fantasy of marrying a prince to have a royal wedding, right?
yeah, I was gonna say that regardless if I'm not an actress, nor do I think I ever will be, but if you are telling me that I'm going to marry a prince, I want all of it. Like I want the whole thing, you know? And I'm not saying that that's not nerve-wracking and that alone doesn't come with its own stress because I believe it does. And she spoke about that in the beginning of the interview. But no girl I want to believe would not want to feel like a princess on their wedding day. And she literally had the opportunity to make that a real life come true, you know?
Yeah, and that speaks to a point that she brings up later, which is that she didn't Google them or look into anything. So at this point of their relationship and of her being a royal, it still might have been exciting for her,
Yeah.
and we can get into that tea here in a minute once it comes to it. But right after she talked about the wedding day and like her take on the wedding, she spills some major tea. She says,
Yeah.
and I want to hear your take on this if you think it's true or not, because media outlets are completely split. People are saying this cannot have happened. But she says that her and Harry actually got married 3 days before the televised event, just the
Yeah.
two of them in a courthouse for like them, for their sake and their peace of mind to have time together. Um, but now outlets are saying there's absolutely no way that that could have happened without people knowing, especially that close to the actual wedding that was televised. What do you think?
I think that it could be possible. I mean, if depending on where they were staying prior, I don't see why someone couldn't have come and just done a quick little nuptial.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, there are certain things that like I want to believe her on, and I do believe most of the things that she said, but that particular one I don't really think she would have a reason, like why lie, you know what I mean? um
Yeah, I think that
what would it
that's like
matter?
that's a big part of this interview is a lot of people are discrediting what she's saying, but a lot of the things are like, why would she, like what would
Exactly.
be the reason to lie about that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I agree with that. I think it's definitely possible. I don't know if it's true or not. But I do think that it's possible. And she admits, like she says that she was naive about what it would be like to join a royal family, and that, she didn't really know what the job duties were of.
That's the point. That's the everything else I think is very easy to believe. That comment to me is really difficult for me to believe. I Neither you or me, as far as I know, you're not a royal. Um,
Well,
but if you are, let me know. Let me know now. But um, I think that even as Americans and people who have not we don't have royalty here, unless we're talking about Queen Beyonce, but that's a different conversation for another day. But you know, I think you and me, while everything is different when you actually get into it, I think we have a general idea of what it would be. I don't think it's an easy thing to be a royal by any mean. um And I think you and me do know the family. I wouldn't need to Google Prince Harry to know who his grandmother is or to know who his mother was. So when she made those comments, I was kind of like, did you really not Google them? Did you
Yeah.
really not Google them? You know,
Well, I mean, also the statement to me was almost as if like I guess my whole thought when I was watching this was like, this is not a new story. Like this
no.
exact story is Diana's story, pretty much. Okay. So once Princess Di came into the picture and all that stuff happened after, Americans became aware. Like
Yes.
maybe before Diana, we didn't know much about royalty or what it was like or the hardships. But after her entrance into royalty and her passing, we have followed that whether or not we wanted to. I mean,
Yeah.
let's talk even about like when Kate was marrying what's
William.
his
Yeah.
fuck yeah,
William.
Prince William. Like it was like I didn't even care to watch the wedding, but I couldn't get away from it. It was
Yeah.
everywhere in the US. Everybody was talking about it. So you can't say that you don't know because
Yeah.
at that point you were one of us. You couldn't escape
Exactly.
it.
And bringing up Princess Diana is, you know, when she said she didn't know, I've heard in previous interviews where she said friends warned her and told her, Meghan, the British press is not easy to deal with. They're more difficult to deal with than the US press. And she kind of just brushed it off. But I mean, I was really young when Princess Diana passed away, but I've watched enough documentaries to know what she'd gone through was horrific.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to believe that Meghan did not know even a little bit, even the slightest clue of what Princess Diana had gone through.
Well, that's such a good point too, because I didn't even think about that until you said it. Like later in the interview, she says, my friends were warning me about the British press and like all this stuff. And it's like, if your friends were warning you and your friends knew, when you started dating him, wouldn't your friends have said anything? If they're
Yeah,
so in the know, like, wouldn't, you know what I mean?
yeah,
You're surrounded by people who probably have Googled. Even if you haven't yourself, you don't live under a rock. And that's important to note. So, I mean, there are definitely aspects of it that I think, again, it's like it's that give and take of some of it's true and some of it's probably not.
yeah,
When she talks about being a working royal, okay, I still don't know what a working royal does. So even after this interview, so I don't blame her for not knowing that. But like,
yeah,
you are dating, engaged to, and then marrying the son of the princess who literally changed the landscape of royalty.
yeah.
He had to have talked to you about that.
Well, one of the comments he made in the interview that I found striking, I mean, there were many, but this one stuck out to me when she said they were on their way to meet his grandmother, aka Queen Elizabeth II, and that he asked her if she knew how to curtsy. And she said, curtsy, I don't know why. I mean, she didn't even know why she had to curtsy, and then and be that she didn't know how to do it. So part of me also blames him, like,
For not
why
prepping
didn't you
her.
tell her? Yeah, why didn't
Yeah.
you tell her all of this? Why didn't you show her how to do this? I don't think I would know how to properly curtsy, and I watch royals all the time, but why didn't he prep her a little bit?
Yeah. I don't know. And yeah, she said that. She said like, I knew that you curtsied when you met royalty, but I kind of thought that that was part of the show. Like you did it in front of the cameras or outside, but I
Yeah,
didn't realize that when you're meeting somebody in person behind closed doors, you still have to curtsy.
yeah,
And I'm also a bit like, I don't, I don't know. Like it seemed overhyped to me. Like
hmm,
to me, if I'm sitting again, and we aren't sitting in her seat, so we don't know,
yeah.
but I would imagine like you could just be in the car and he'd be like, look, you have to curtsy. You Google a quick curtsy video and then you do it.
YouTube.
Yeah. She was
Yeah.
like, we sat outside the palace and we practiced and all this stuff. And Oprah was like, how did you do? And she's like, oh, my curtsy was very deep. And it's like, I just, is it that serious?
No, there were a lot of things that I think were brought to the table that weren't necessary. And the hard pill to swallow is that, like, I don't know if have you watched The Crown on
I
Netflix?
haven't, no. And also, Oh my God. Did you see when Oprah asked them that and they were dead silent? There was like dead air for 15
Yeah.
seconds. They
Yeah.
literally, I was like,
But
are
they
they going to
both said
say
that they'd
anything?
watched, they said they watched a couple of episodes. So that by itself was surprising because The Crown is the first show that we've gotten that is like so inside the palace. And while the dialogue might not be real, Harry was recently on James Gordon's
Mm.
show when he said, I would prefer people to watch The Crown than to believe anything that the media says.
Which is why I'm
um
like, I don't believe that that to me, I will stand on a hard, that was false. I don't believe that they've only seen a couple episodes. I believe that they binged that. First
binge
of all,
watched it.
they were in lockdown when that happened. What else were you
Yeah.
doing? You were watching Netflix. Okay. You were watching Hulu and you were watching
Yeah.
a documentary about your mom. Like, that's really what it comes down to, where it was a bit confusing when they were quiet, because it was almost like they were scared to say if they had watched it.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, we need to keep in perspective of all of this, really. Like, people are pitying, Meghan, and I'm not saying they shouldn't. What she's saying is true, it was definitely hard, but like, let's think about Harry, because he watched this happen with his mom and now it's happening with his wife. He can't
Yeah.
escape it. So let's just like keep him in the picture, because I think of all things, if there's one person in this situation who didn't choose to have any of this happen, it was him. He
Correct.
was
Yeah.
born into it. He kind of got screwed on both ends.
Yeah.
But, Harry and Meghan have like a very philanthropic outlook.
Yes. Yes.
They've always tried to do that in their job as royals. And you kind of see when Oprah's walking with them through their house that they have this like emphasis on rescuing animals.
Yeah.
They had like rescued dogs from shelters. They had a ton of chickens that they rescued from like a slaughterhouse. That's just a quick aside, but
Yeah.
I thought that was, if you look at the journalistic point of Oprah's documentary interview, it was almost like, oh, and let's take you into their personal life so you can see that they're good people behind closed doors too.
But I think that what's so big about that is that royals in general are so private. Like,
Yeah.
when we get a glimpse of Kate Middleton or Prince Harry or any of them, Charles, Camilla, it's like it's a gasp because we don't see them. We don't hear from them. We don't nothing unless it's doing some sort of charity work or some sort of event. And if you go back, how I believe I saw something today, like 26 years. It might have been longer, but I think it's about that. When Diana did her interview, that was such a big deal because royals do not participate in interviews like what Meghan and Harry
Yeah.
just did. So for us to even see their house and to see like the chickens and I mean, we will never see that from William and Kate. And
No.
it's just not. And that's why The Crown is such a big deal, because a lot of these stories have never been told before. And honestly, it's so fascinating to me.
Well, I
Like,
mean, a big part
love
of it
it.
is that it humanizes them as people and not just figures. It's a lot of like
Exactly.
what Meghan said is true. To us, we have celebrities, we have Beyonce. To them, they have royalty and they look at
Yeah.
them as like not real people, just like how we
Yeah.
forget that our A-list celebrities are just like us.
Yeah.
And I think, of course, there's kind of this aspect of expectation to be involved in charity and things like that if you're a royal. But the animal aspect I thought was so interesting, because they talk about Meghan's dog, and she says that she adopted him from a kill shelter before she even knew Harry or met him. And he came with her throughout the whole process and is still living. He's Archie's dog now.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, if anything, this was something she really cared about on her own
Yeah.
before royalty, and that humanizes her in a way, as if she's not humanized to us as
Yeah.
Americans now. That was a good like touching point and an aside. And what's so funny is after they show that and like all of that stuff that she's doing, it cuts back to the interview and it's like hard questions from Oprah.
Yeah.
And this is when she brings up Hurricane Meghan.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that. So Oprah says, she brings up this headline of Meghan being Hurricane Meghan and making Kate Middleton cry.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see on Meghan's face that she's like shocked by this and just, knows that it's not true. And when Oprah says, like, what happened? What was the situation? Why did Kate cry? Meghan's quiet. And then she says, the headline is false. It didn't happen.
Yeah.
And
It
Oprah
was
says,
reverse.
yeah, Oprah says, so what happened? And she basically again is quiet. There's a lot of dead air in this interview because you can see Meghan and Harry when he comes out, even though they're not royalty anymore and they are free to say what they want, they're scared. You can tell that
Yeah.
they don't know what the potential, backlash could be from what they're saying. And she's quiet, and then she says, yeah, it was the reverse. And she explains that basically Kate made her, Meghan, cry, but Meghan makes it a point that she kept this incident out of the media. Like, she didn't go to the press, she didn't leak it,
Yeah.
she made sure nobody knew so that it wouldn't kind of put a bad rep to Meg or to Kate.
Yeah. To Kate. Mm-hmm.
And then she was shocked when, like, 7 months after the incident took place, the complete opposite story came out. And she made sure to say, like, okay, it happened, Kate apologized, she's a good person, but the whole team, Kate and our teams knew the truth, and nobody went to the press and said this isn't true.
But that is not surprising to me as somebody who follows the royals. They are not people who are going to go to the press and squash stories. That has never happened with any member of the royal family. And it was not going to start with her, And I get it that sometimes it's just you're not built for it. It's not for everybody. I don't know if I would be able to handle people saying stories about me that I know are blatantly false, and knowing that people have the power to squash it and they just don't. But I just when that happened, it just wasn't surprising. They have very rarely do they make a statement, and I don't think they would have made a statement saying, "Oh, by the way, it was actually Kate who made Meghan cry." Like, I just feel like there's a lot of other issues that the Queen has on her desk. Like, that's not going to come out of Buckingham Palace. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think, later in the interview, Meghan kind of says, I was hurt that they didn't squash this because I've seen them speak out about much less. But what we have to keep in mind is that they are an institution. So the only time that they're squashing rumors is if they reflect poorly on the institution. And
Yes,
Meghan making Kate cry or Kate making Meghan cry is drama.
it's
It's
yeah.
not something that's going to affect them. So why
No,
would they speak out? And
exactly.
I think that is something that it's brought up as kind of a way to ease into what happened once we get to, like, racist remarks and things
Yeah.
like that. But realistically, I don't think Meghan could have expected them to react, and I don't really think she did. I think the shocking part of what happened was, how did the narrative get twisted and why did it come out so late? I mean, it was
Yeah.
like 7 months
7
after.
months.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
why is it now even being brought up? It's done. It's over. You know?
And I wonder, like, who leaks these stories?
That's what I'm saying. Like,
Like, who's going to the press 7 months later and being like, "By the way, I have a story for you," you know?
yeah. And I think, like, we're talking about squashing rumors. Let's keep in mind that things were definitely different for Meghan given circumstances we'll get into in a little bit, but almost everybody that's come into royalty has at some point had a rumor or a ridiculous headline brought up
Exactly.
about them. And Oprah even says that. I mean, she compares Meghan and Kate, but what's so interesting, she talks about Kate, I forget what it was, like weighty Katie or something, where she's just like waiting around for the prince to marry her, and that was
Yeah.
her rumor or her, like, bad press. But this is undeniable. Meghan versus Kate, this is undeniable when Oprah says this. She talks about the comparison of them in the media, and this literally blew my mind because I didn't know. So Oprah shows photos of press headlines from when Kate was pregnant, holding her like baby bump with one hand. And the headlines read like how sweet of a mother she is, how excited she is for motherhood. And then there's the photos of Meghan where she's like holding her baby bump with two hands when she was pregnant with Archie. And the headlines are like, Meghan's so vain. She just
Yes.
like wants attention. And it is interesting in that way. And I wonder why that is.
I think it's really just to sell papers. And I think, unfortunately, the media and the press love to pit women against each other.
Yeah.
Um, and they would have loved if Meghan and Kate really hated each other. If they were, it's like typical rivalry, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? That probably happens in every single person's home and family, you know, whether it's like sibling rivalry or your sister-in-law rivalry, it happens. And I think that they wanted that. They wanted to paint this picture of that they hate each other, and you know, Kate did this and Meghan said this. And I think that it was just, it's awful that the media does that, because I think that um, if we look at William and Harry as brothers, we want this like loving brother relationship. But we look at Meghan as Kate and Kate as sister in laws, and we want them to hate each other.
Yeah. And not even as sister-in-laws, but as mothers. Like
Mhm.
that to me would have been like a red flag if I was Meghan. Like, don't talk about me as a mom. This is my
Yeah.
experience and I'm going to go through it and you're not going to say anything. I do think it is interesting though what you're saying about what sells, because I didn't even think about that. I mean, we were just coming off Kate really being pregnant
Yeah.
and they were like, okay, us showing this picture of Meghan holding her stomach, that's not, I mean, it's repetitive. We just talked about
Yeah.
this with Kate. So what can we do? And it's easy to paint her as vain because she's an actress.
Yeah.
And a lot of
Yeah.
Hollywood, actors, actresses, or just employees, Hollywood people
Yeah.
are often thought to be vain. But it wasn't, it was a headline where you're like, okay, whatever. But the reach headline was these avocado headlines. I
Oh,
mean, I'm dead. When Kate eats an avocado, they're reporting how healthy she is and how she cares so much
so
about,
ridiculous.
her inner health. Then Meghan eats an avocado and they're like, oh, she's taking food that causes water shortages and all this stuff. And I'm like, have you been to California? Because everybody and their moms is eating avocados here.
Oh, send some over. We don't get good avocados in Florida, please.
Yeah, that is true. But you guys have really good like citrus fruit.
True,
I feel like
true.
we don't get that here.
No.
But I mean, it was
Yeah,
such a reach. I was like, okay.
ridiculous. I mean, like I said, I feel like the Kate did have her fair share of bad press. None of it were racist. I have seen headlines from Meghan that were just stupid, like
Mhm.
straight out of Compton. I've seen that before, which is ridiculous. They called Kate Waity Katie for a long time. I have seen them talk about how thin she is, comparing her. Princess Diana was bulimic,
Mhm.
saying she's just like Diana. I've seen those kinds of headlines, but they've all had it, they've all had really bad press. None of it have been racist. And Meghan said that, there's a fine line between bad press and racist, being blatantly racist. But well, I'll wait for you to get into the racist thing, because I'm like,
No, but I
just
mean, it is a good point because we are talking about how everybody that's brought into the royal family has some headlines, because you have to remember too, like these are their Hollywood. It's their,
Mhm.
celebrities. So just like how we have page 6 that reports ridiculous headlines that, might be slanderous and we kind of overlook it, that's what their press is doing to them. Once you get into
Yeah.
higher rank, once you're the queen, like people aren't going to say anything about the queen because there is that
No.
line. But Meghan
Yeah.
is still free range because, first of all, at one point, she wasn't even in the royal family. Second of all, even when she was, from the minute that they got married, there were discussions about stepping down, which we'll
Yeah.
get into. But I think that probably perpetuated what happened. They saw her as a target and they just kept at it. Going back to just Meghan being, philanthropic and what she stands for or says she stands for, she talks about being not only disappointed in the institution and in the family in some ways, but she talks about being disappointed in herself because she says to Oprah that she's always really been an advocate for women's rights and women using their voice to empower themselves and others. And now she's put in this position where she can empower so many women, and she doesn't. She says that for 4 years, she stays silent. And Oprah asks her what I think is the most iconic point of speech in this entire interview. She says, and you can just tell, like, this is what I love about Oprah, that these questions weren't prepared. She literally just heard Meghan say it and was like, ding, I have a question.
Yeah.
She says, were you silent or were you silenced?
Yeah.
And Meghan says, of course, after like 10 seconds of dead air, that, you know, she was silenced and she was told
Yeah.
not to comment, which takes us into this whole other aspect of the interview because she says, you know, listen, they told me not to say anything because they were going to stand up for me, they were going to protect me. And so for 4 years, I didn't do anything. I didn't say
Yeah.
anything because I was waiting for them and nothing ever came. You know, of course, it's important to point out for those who didn't watch it, and even for me, because I didn't really understand this before watching, but the family and the institution are different. And the
Yeah.
institution is like the PR. It's like, who would
Yeah.
handle this, right? So maybe the queen is like thinking, wow, this is horrific treatment, but she really can't say anything
No.
because her employer is telling her to be quiet and they're going to handle
Yeah.
it. And then they never do.
But again, none of this is surprising to me. I just feel like I don't know if it is because of how much I have, researched the royals prior to all of this, but I feel like she was completely blindsided into what she was really getting into.
Yeah.
There was a moment she said that she hadn't seen her passport and her driver's license, and I was like, that again wasn't surprising. I'm like, did you think that you were just gonna like whip out your driver's license? No, you are now HRH, Duchess of Sussex, and I don't know what you thought. Like, the Queen doesn't even have a passport,
Right.
it's your whole life changes, and I urge everyone who was moved by this story to watch The Crown, because you get an inside look of what Diana went through.
Yeah.
And the difference is that Diana didn't even have Charles by her side. At least Meghan has Harry, but
Yeah.
Diana's whole life was turned upside down, where she had to ask permission to speak to her husband. She would call his secretary and be like, "Can I speak to my husband?" And it is completely different from how you and me live our lives. And like you said, she would have to go through the institution to do anything, take a dance class. Diana was belittled for the way that she was a mother. She
Yeah.
was such a hands-on mom compared to the royals that came before her, and they looked at her like, what do you mean you're bringing your kid on this tour of Australia?
Right.
um it was just unheard of. And so the same backlash that Meghan got, Diana received for things that were beyond something between her and Kate. And while I think Harry was trying to stop all of this before it became like a Diana situation, I just think that Meghan might have been a little bit naive and a little
Yeah.
bit. I believe everything she said. I just think that she was not prepared for the way she was treated.
Well, yeah, I
But
mean, a
it's
lot of what happened to Meghan and what happened to Diana were similar. If you just look at just fact of events, I mean, it's very similar. But and I think that we all kind of felt that way really until this interview. We could assume, especially with everything going on in the world and the BLM, protests that were
Mhm.
happening and all of that stuff, that it was race driven. But obviously what Meghan says next to Oprah really defines the interview and kind of changes a lot of people's mind on Meghan, I think. So trigger warning for everybody, we're about to get into the topic of race.
Yeah.
So, you know, at this point in the interview and in the narrative, it's, the institution not protecting Meghan, and that's one thing because she did choose to get into this life, but
Yeah.
she gets pregnant with Archie, who, let's keep in mind, did not choose to get into this life.
Mhm.
And, Meghan talks about how when she was pregnant with Archie, rumors were swirling and they all sat down and had a conversation. And by they, it really wasn't clear if it was the family or the institution or both or everybody together, but they, this entity, sat down with her and Harry and said, basically, we don't want your child to have the title of prince or princess, and we don't want to provide the child with protection. Now, this is like so heartless because it's one thing to say that to a grown adult woman who is in love with Harry and wants to be in the royal family, but Archie's a child, and we see this, let's compare it to American culture, right? It's just like Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher. Their kids, their faces are blurred out of all paparazzi photos because they have set that standard that we chose this life. We want to be famous. You can take our pictures when we look like crap and go into the grocery store, but our kids, they didn't choose this. So don't profit off their faces. And it's kind of the same thing, but obviously in this case with protection of Archie. And it's important to note this because a lot of people assumed that Meghan and Harry didn't want Archie to have the title. That's what Meghan says. She says it was reported that we didn't want that, but we did. We wanted that because we wanted him to have protection. They didn't want that. That's another false narrative. And she says that in her personal opinion, that title is his birthright.
Yeah, it is. I agree.
They don't have the right to take it away, Meghan and Harry as the parents, and neither does the institution or the family.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100% that I will admit, I thought it was them as well. I thought I was one of those people that when his name was announced and he didn't have HRH or he didn't have anything, I was a bit taken aback because most of them, I can't even think of anyone who doesn't. I mean, we can go really down the line, like Princess Anne's kids still have them. I mean, Princess Margaret's kids have titles. I mean, we're going like back, and so it was really surprising to me. So when she said that, I was a little surprised because I was one of those people that really believed that they were like, no, we're good on the title. Don't worry about it,
Well, yeah. And I think this point in the interview is so important because we think, oh, she just wants her son to be called Prince, but it's not even about the title to her, and she says that later on. I think it's like, take away our title, take away our working rights, but like, please protect us because it's very similar to like a president in the United States, right? When Obama left office, just because he's not president anymore doesn't mean he shouldn't be protected because he still had that title.
And we still call them president after the fact. We're still saying former president or we still say that after the fact. And I mean, they still get Secret Service protection for life.
For life, yeah. As should royals, especially when they're children and they don't know even what is going on, right?
Yeah.
So Oprah asks Meghan, like, why do you think that they didn't want Archie to have this title of prince? And Oprah does ask, do you think it was race related? Which is so interesting because I never even thought of that. I was like, oh, they just don't like Meghan and they're mad at Harry for listening to her. So they're just trying to like be, hurtful and take this away from their child. But I mean, Meghan is quiet for probably the longest time in the interview. And she says that there were conversations about concerns related to how dark the baby Archie's skin would be. And I mean, this is a meme. Unfortunately, it did turn into a meme, but it is a meme that took over the internet because Oprah's reaction to this was like, just complete shock. She was like, oh my God, I can't believe that. Because I think we all maybe had like an inkling that that was what was going on, but to admit that somebody spoke those words is crazy. And Meghan refused to say who it was. She did say that the conversations weren't had with her, but were had with Harry alone, which I don't know if that makes it better or worse. That she wasn't even involved in the conversations. But yeah, I mean, she refuses to disclose who it was. And when Harry comes out, they bring it back up and he refuses to disclose who it was. But later interviews that Oprah and Gayle did together, Oprah did say, never after the interview did he ever disclose to me who it was, but he did make it very clear that it was not his grandmother or grandfather. It was not the
And
queen.
I don't think it would be them. And let me start by saying that it's no shocker to me, and it shouldn't be a shocker to anyone, that racism is deeply embedded in the royal family, not calling out any person in particular. And while it might not be one or two people in the family, the entire monarchy has been built on racism.
Yeah.
From Meghan coming in as a biracial, but aside from being biracial, she was married previously,
Yeah,
which
there's a
is a
lot of things about her.
huge,
Yeah.
yeah. There have been people who were forbidden to marry in the royal family because they were marrying somebody who was divorced. So for her coming in as a divorcee, a half Black woman, it is like huge, huge. I'm not surprised that these conversations took place. I think I'm more surprised that they took place maybe in front of Harry. But I'm not surprised that these conversations and whispers were probably happening with other members among themselves of the royal family. You know what I mean? And I can't imagine what that must feel like, it must feel like an outsider, an outcast, like, and they're not even talking about her, they're talking about her unborn child, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, if you want to get into the conversation of white privilege, it's the monarchy. Like
Yeah.
it is. And that's not their fault. But just as it is in America, it is not your fault when you have white privilege, but it is your job and your duty to educate yourself and to change the narrative. And having conversations about revoking titles because your skin color might not match is definitely not educating yourself. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely not changing the narrative. It's continuing what has happened for years. And I mean, again, we'll talk about it when Harry gets into the picture, but he even makes the point like, why would you not take this opportunity as a way to connect with the people and say, we hear
Yeah.
you, we see you, we are you. Like
Yeah.
instead you're just cutting out a whole population from connecting with you and respecting
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I did see that. I saw somebody said, Meghan Markle had the power to come in and change so much within the palace and within the monarchy itself. And that was all taken away essentially because I don't know if it's because people are afraid of change, but she really did. She had the power to, like you said, to say, I look like you, my son looks like you, my daughter, our future daughter looks like you, and yeah, none of that ever, nothing, and it will not happen at this point.
Yeah, this interview is the closest thing we're going to get to that.
Yeah,
And I think this interview, it's so heavy in so many ways, which is why it just deserved a deep dive and like a long conversation. Because aside from race and, cutting out false narratives, a big portion of this is mental health. And if you care about what happened to Diana, this should have been the point in the interview that really stood out because what when I was watching it, when I was hearing Meghan talk about her mental health, it was the conversation that I would imagine Diana was having internally because she didn't have the support from her husband. She didn't do an interview where she directly spoke about it as Meghan is now. But Meghan talks about how the tabloids were reporting on her race and it began to affect her mental health. And she admits that she was actually suicidal at one point and shared this with Harry, which is what inspired Harry and Oprah to work on this mental health series together that they're working on. But what I thought was so interesting was that Meghan said it wasn't secret. She was
yeah,
very open about it. She went to the institution and asked if she could get help. She wanted to either see a therapist or be hospitalized because she knew that her mental health was not good.
yeah,
And they denied it from her. They said, that if word got out that she was in a bad mental state or that she was receiving mental health treatment, that it would reflect poorly on them. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, too bad, so sad. And it's so funny because this was a big turning point. This was a turning point for why they left. It's ironic, not funny, but ironic that they would look at somebody asking for mental health help as a poor reflection when the person is saying, I am literally suicidal. Like, what is a worse reflection? Them being hospitalized so they can get help, or losing
Them
another
committing
person?
suicide. Yeah. It is, they have a mentality, and when I say they, the institution, the monarchy, that is, you have mental problems, you have problems, we don't want to hear about them.
Right.
Like, go back over there and be quiet with your problems. And again, in The Crown and so many other documentaries, we know that Diana had bulimia, she had mental health issues, she was literally crying for help, and nobody was listening. And it's sad, it really is sad. I can't imagine how Meghan would feel. And the people, like, getting into Piers Morgan, and very recently, I don't know if you saw this morning, Sharon Osbourne,
I saw that.
um, you know, that say they don't believe anything she says, is not only damaging for her, but damaging to other people who might also be struggling with mental health. And these are people who are already afraid to come out and say something. And for Sharon Osbourne, Piers Morgan, who are such huge public figures, to say we don't believe you, just pushes these people even further back into the dark hole that they're in, and makes them afraid. I feel like,
And what a ridiculous thing not to believe, because if you take out the royal aspect, take out everything we're talking about,
yeah,
being royal is, just as Meghan said, she said, it's quarantine. Everybody
hmm,
knows what I went
yeah,
through, because we're all going through it now, where you can't leave, you can't see your friends. You know what I mean? I wanted to go to lunch with my friends and they said, no, you're everywhere. You've already been out. You don't need to go out. Think about suicide rates
hmm,
in during quarantine. Think about how many people's mental health took a severe decline during quarantine because they simply just could not get out.
yeah,
Now, on top of that, put the fact that you're in a country that's not yours. Okay, you're already having issues with your family because all this stuff was going on with her dad at the time. And on top of that, people are holding your race against you.
yeah,
You're the mother of a child who you have to fight for his birthrights during all of this. I mean,
yeah,
it would be more shocking, more unbelievable if she wasn't struggling with
yeah,
mental health issues. And I mean, think about what happened to Diana. None of that's even proven, but so many people believe that it was a hit. And look how badly that has painted,
yeah,
the monarchy, because it's like even today, documentaries are being made about it all these years later. So
yeah,
wouldn't you just think to learn from that and say, okay, something happened with Diana. We should have listened. That's what people wanted. They wanted us to
yeah.
listen. So let's use even this as a way to show that we are learning and we're growing and supporting, mental health within our community.
Yeah, like, and that goes back to my comment of her being able to come in and change, not just racial issues, but mental health issues
Yeah.
within there. They are so private. If any of them have ever had mental health issues, like, none of us would ever know. And all of that went through my head as I was watching the interview. I was like, I can only imagine what Prince Charles and all of them are thinking right now. Like, holy shit, this chick is like taking us all down. Like, um no, I can't imagine. I really can't imagine how she feels. And I think that, keeping Harry in mind, he must have felt so conflicted of wanting to protect his wife and his unborn child while also protecting the crown, because we know that from enough documentaries and reading enough books, that the crown comes first no matter what. And that is how even Princess Diana ended up marrying Charles,
Yeah.
because they did not want to get married. And there are stories that say that Charles practically begged the queen, like, I don't want to marry this woman. And they were like, no, we don't care, marry her. And I feel like if we would have allowed to have these conversations back then, and these things would have been candid and more open, we would have saved a life. Um, but I think Harry did the right thing in saying, I'm pulling her out of this, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to allow this, because I can't imagine how much more damaging it could have been for her.
Become.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good point too, because it's at this point, after she's talking about her mental health and how she was denied help, and kind of at this being a turning point, Harry saw it with his mom and now he's seeing it with his wife. This is when he joins Oprah and Meghan. And just again, a quick aside, the first thing that he does is announce the gender of their baby, which will be delivered in the summertime. And it's, of course, a girl, as we know. Even if you weren't following this, you know that because everybody's talking about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he joins and quickly they jump right back into the conversation of what happened after. So I want to recap what they said happened with the move. Okay. So originally Harry and Meghan moved to Canada. Once they left the royal family, well, okay, let's say this, because people think when they moved they were done with royalty, and that's not true.
Yeah.
When they originally moved to Canada, they were still part of the British Commonwealth, because Canada is part of British Commonwealth. So what they wanted to do was be far enough away that they had freedom to be a family, but be close enough that they could still serve the queen and do duties. But when this happened, when they moved, protection for them and Archie was revoked. Okay. So they weren't protected. And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And Harry says, we were in a place that's not our home. The borders were going to close. Everybody knew where we were because the tabloids were reporting on it, and we were going to be unprotected. So it was not a safe environment for us or our child. So after COVID hit, they moved to Los Angeles, where Tyler Perry actually offered them to stay at his house and offered to protect them. He used his services to protect their family, which is, I mean, I love Tyler Perry. I think he stands for so much good, but this, I had no idea. And that
Yeah.
speaks to who he is as a person, because he literally saved royals and never spoke out about it.
Yeah.
And a few months later, after they stay in LA for a while with Tyler Perry, like at his house and using his services, then they get their own place in Santa Barbara, which is the place we see in the interview where there's chickens and dogs and all that stuff. What are your thoughts on that, on the move and what happened with the revoking of their protection as a family?
I don't understand it, because regardless of Meghan and well, okay, regardless of Meghan, Prince Harry is a blood royal. He can remove himself from the royal family all he wants. He's blood. His father will one day be king. His brother will one day be king. His grandmother is currently the queen. Um, so that blood is he's a royal. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier. President Bush still has Secret Service. So to think, to me, that Prince Harry, because no matter what, he is Prince Harry, does not have some sort of protection, it blows my mind.
And he says that too. He says,
Yeah.
I knew maybe they'd revoke Archie's. I knew they'd revoke Meghan's, but I never thought that there would be a day
No.
where they took my protection away because I'm blood. And that's what it also comes down to as well. Like, we're talking about institution, but that's family when it comes down to it.
Exactly.
And you're putting your family out there to the wolves because you're
And I
taking
don't
away.
know, like, what the like rank is, like, if some, like, at what point can Prince Charles or his grandmother jump in and say, absolutely not, he needs protection? Or
Yeah.
was it a fact of that nobody was fighting for him? You know what I mean?
Well, I think it's similar to what she said about there being HR. if you think about it like a company, like
Yeah.
the protection is provided by the institution. So it's like if you're at a workplace and somebody gets laid off or fired, you can't say to them, and this is speculation, I don't know, but I would assume that it's like you can't say no, even though they no longer are employed here, you know, you need to be paying their paychecks or whatever, I don't
Yeah.
know, but I would assume that if there's so many hoops to jump through, as she's saying, then there probably was some hoops with the protection. But when the protection's revoked, it makes people think that there's that they did something wrong. And that's what
Yeah.
Harry says. He says he wants to make it very clear about how he left the royal family because he believes that it's a misconception. He says that they stepped down, and stepping down from duties as a full-time working royal isn't even unheard of. Apparently many people do it, and um because of this, he saw similarities between the treatment of Meghan and of his mom
Yeah.
when nobody would help her. And, rumors were that they had blindsided the queen and just left. But he says again that that's not true, and that they had actually had many conversations prior to them stepping down, as early as 3 days after the wedding. But he did say that, what hurt him the most of the whole situation was that Parliament spoke out about
Yeah.
what was happening. Parliament said, the slanderous headlines against Meghan are horrific, and everything going on with them is just obscene. Yet nobody from his family made a public statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this was the final straw for him, where he said, okay, if my family's not even supporting me, why not just end it? Why not just cut ties here?
Yeah. And I mean, the parliament thing is funny to note because it, it's still just not surprising to me. I think that like we now know there needs to be a major change in the way that things are handled within the royal family, and I really hope that from Meghan and Harry that does come. I feel like they are a family who does not like change. They've literally been doing the same thing for like hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Like nothing changes, and I think that they are afraid of change. They feel like if this is working, then let's keep doing it. So the fact that Parliament spoke out and Harry himself was like, I mean, who did he think was going to speak out? Did he think his grandmother was going to be like, okay, press? But he made a comment in the interview that said the press and the monarchy are like a relationship that cannot be broken. They both need each other, and I found that to be really interesting. Do you remember when he was talking about that
Yeah, I
that
mean, and we see that as Americans, we see that too with news coverage. I mean, look at the election. They were
Yeah.
one and the same, right? It was like without the shit show, they would have nothing to report.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
just perpetuated it. And we see that a lot with celebrities too. They do go hand in hand. Same thing for those who listen to the Framing Britney deep dive that I did. It's like at first she needed the paparazzi and they needed them. And they needed her. And it was a relationship that worked for both of them.
Yeah.
And in the same way, the British press is the paparazzi in this situation.
Yes. But I also think well, from what I kind of understood was that they want the press to keep them relevant. Let's take all of the monarchies throughout Europe that have just died. Nobody talks about the queen or a princess from Spain or Denmark or Switzerland. Like nobody cares. You know what I mean? The British monarch is still relevant today. Why? Is it because of the press? Like we're still talking about them. They're still, Meghan and Harry's wedding was seen by millions of people around the world, and we cared. You know what I mean? And I
Well,
feel like, yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I feel like the press talking about them and keeping them relevant, is a way of them saying, you know what, let's not piss off the press. We want to
Yeah.
stay in their good graces. We want to stay relevant. And Meghan mentioned that they have Christmas parties at the palace, and she's like, there are reasons for that. They want to remain relevant as long as they possibly can, because
Yeah.
what keeps the monarch going is taxpayers' money. You know.
Well, I think what keeps, you pose the question, what keeps them relevant? Why are we still talking about it? And I honestly, in my personal opinion, why it's relevant to me still is because of what happened to Diana. I think if
Hmm.
that hadn't happened, they would not be as relevant as they are. Because if you look at what they were like before her, they weren't as relevant. And then, they picked up on kind of the bad energy surrounding the situation with her. People grasped onto that. And from her death on, it has been all eyes on them to see what happens next. And then Kate comes, and Kate's very attractive. And, we feed off of that. And then Meghan comes. And in a lot of ways, she represented a lot for Americans. And so we fed off of that. And now this happens. And to be honest, without Harry and Meghan in the picture, without any more drama, I don't know that they are that relevant to Americans anymore. Once
To
once this
Americans,
once
probably
this
not.
fans out, right? Once this fans out and they make their statement, and Meghan and Harry, make amends with the family, and they say, all right, we're going to live our life in the US and that's it, and we're not part of this anymore. And then the blood between family is good again. What is there to talk about? Because a
Yeah.
lot of that doesn't even affect Americans, right? So, I think really it comes down to rumors that are perpetuated by the press. And that is a great segue into the ending of this interview, because Harry basically says it's the rumors that were spread that caused them to leave. I mean, Meghan says it's not, well, let me say this. Oprah asks, if Meghan wasn't in the picture, would you have left? And
Yeah.
he says, probably not, but he is happier that he did leave, because until Meghan came in the picture, he didn't even realize that there was an
He could
other
leave.
side, and
Yeah.
he says, okay, yeah, I live a privileged life. It's not like I was tortured, but the things I had aren't always the things that make you happy. It's the same thing we see with celebrities who are billionaires. I
Yeah.
mean, money is what we all want, and then we get it, and then what? Right?
Hmm.
Like, love is more important than that. Finding happiness in your giving back is more important than that. And um yeah, so he says he didn't realize that he was trapped. And Oprah says, like, what do you think your mom would think about the decision that you made? And he says, not only does he think that Diana would have been happy for him because he's happy, but he says she probably saw this coming because she went through it
Yeah.
herself. And,
Yeah.
he says that, of course, now him and the queen have a great relationship still. That's his grandmother above anything else. But he doesn't really speak to his dad because he expected more support from his dad, considering he's watching a replay of what happened, to his
Yeah.
mom.
With and he also with his brother William. He
Yeah.
mentioned that him and William's relationship was a little shaky, and he also mentioned that all of them are trapped. He's like, they're all trapped. It's his dad, his brother, and with them, Charles and William being the firstborn of their generation, so to speak, they really can't leave. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? They are both going to be future kings. I
Right.
think that Harry was like, he's always had a little bit of a rebellious side though. You know,
Yeah.
we've all like throughout the years we've seen him partying and in compromising situations.
Right.
Um and like you said, I don't think he realized like, oh wait, I actually don't have to live this life. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But I think he's always been dedicated to the charity work and picking up where his mother left off with certain charities and things like that. But um you know, this has happened before. You know, it has happened. His great grandfather, you know, was not supposed to be king. He it's a very like very similar situations that I think that if you're really into the royals, you might know about, but
Mhm. Right.
it's history basically repeating itself,
Yeah.
but I definitely think the right move has been made. And what I hope to see is like more of them. Like, can they get a reality show now? Like, I want to see like what
Right.
they
Now
do
that
every
Keeping
day.
Up with the Kardashians is over, it's Keeping Up with, Harry and Meghan. No, but
Yeah.
you said it perfectly. I mean, I think a lot of people were wondering what happens next, and he's always picked up where his mom left off as far as charities go. So, finishing off the interview, they start chatting about their new production company, which is like the perfect fit for the two of them, right? So, it's called Archwell Productions, and it's going to provide creative outlets to speak about things that matter to them, meaning they'll probably partner up with like Netflix or a streaming service and create documentaries about things that are important. And he said that the point of this production company was really to foster creative outlets, like I said, but also to provide enough money so that they can be protected, because it's important to
Yeah.
note that they are still not protected. They've been cut off financially, but they want to support organizations still and provide positive storytelling. So, Harry says he has no regrets. He's proud of everything that they've done so far, to get out of the situation. And he has his child, his wife. He's thriving in his new life. Of course, people are divided on the situation, whether or not they think it's true. But Harry says if you just look at the similarities between what's happening with Meghan and what happened with his mother, you can't deny that
Yeah.
the story may have ended differently had we not heard what Meghan had to say. And the story may have ended differently for Diana if we had heard what she had to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is important,
I mean, we could talk about this forever, but
I know. Well, I want to end it with this because Meghan said this, and I think it's so perfect. She talks about The Little Mermaid,
yeah.
and she says, if you watch it and you pay attention, Ariel wants to marry the prince and she wants to be with him because she loves him. And she gets that, but she loses her voice. And in the end of The Little Mermaid, for all of us Disney fans who have seen it and 90s kids, she gets her voice back. She gets to keep the prince and she gets to keep her voice in the end. And in a lot of ways, this story is similar. Now she has her voice back. And for Harry and Meghan, this is their happily ever after.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I wish them all the best. I mean, I'm so excited to see what the future holds. I know that they partnered with Spotify also, that they are doing a podcast. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see like what's next for them as a family. And I think that Meghan is really strong, and I don't think we've heard or seen the last of them. Like we'll continue to see what's next for sure.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. It
Okay.
has been so much fun chatting with you. I would love for you to
Yes.
tell everybody where they can find Pop Dirty to me and listen to you and find you on Instagram.
Yeah, follow me on Instagram and like us on Facebook at Pop Dirty to Me. We are on anywhere you listen to your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, like you name it, we're on there, like over 16 streaming services.
Yes, and same here. You can find me on any streaming service. I'm at Meg in the Morning podcast. Same thing for my handles on Instagram, TikTok, and all the like. I also do IGTV, YouTube, fun things like that. And I am just excited to continue to talk about things like this that actually matter in pop culture.
For sure. For
For
sure.
sure.
Thank